Hey guys, today I'm excited. I have my friend Michael P here. He is the host of Third Eye Drops podcast, and he's into Jung and symbols and stuff like that. So I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Kendall. Um, as you said, I am into Jung. I am into symbols, but really, I think the way that I came to be into those things is through a comedy of errors and just tumbling my way down the sort of sense making path until I hit some kind of ground that made some level of sense to me. And that's sort of like mythopoetic, Jungian,
Hmm.
Joseph Campbellian way of seeing is really something that I cannot. It feels like there's just this gravity to it. Like that's one of the only ways of really making sense, like meaning making in the world that consistently feels right to me. So yeah,
I remember back in college and undergrad reading The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell,
yeah.
and that was just so powerful to me. So it drew me in, and I was like, "Wow, this is amazing." And I think that was my first introduction into the world that you swim in regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great introduction. Yeah, I for sure gobbled up those Power of Myth talks too that were on PBS back in the
Hmm.
day with Moyers. And it's really, and I love seeing Campbell at that stage in his life because he's older and he's like a retired professor at this point. He's written all these books. So you're just seeing somebody with such a command of the religions of the world, myth, classics, psychology. He was hugely influenced by Jung. So he's just, you're seeing this like fully formed, as close to what I think is like a fully individuated being as we get to see in a lifetime. And he feels like a true elder at that point, and
Hmm.
there's no like weird, there's nothing he has to prove. There's no like dogma he's preaching. It's a true like dialogos in the old Greek sense of trying to like make sense of reality and interlock you with another human being who's trying to do the same thing. And it just felt so powerful and vibrant all throughout. And it's conversations like that too that eventually pulled me into podcasting. It's like, you see what conversation can be. We were shown these like absolutely flimsy, hollow, cartoonish, short conversations on TV growing up on like the news or late night shows or whatever. And everybody knows there's more than that. You have a deep
Hmm.
conversation with a friend and there's something like truly soul stroking about those kinds of conversations. And I think that's the other kind of major gravity pull in my life is just like that way of exploring through
Hmm.
dialogue has just been, as you know, such a huge mainstay for me for so many years.
Right. One thing that really is drawing in about Campbell is that he's not dogmatic, and you could even say he's slightly annoying in that I'm like, so do you think that this this religion or these symbols are true? Are they not? Or whatever. He just like I just get from them what is what they symbolize and what that means for people's lives, and um it cuts across cultures and religions and different stuff like that. It's just a he's a connector, and so it helps you lower your guard, and it's like we can all agree that these symbols have power and meaning and are helpful to our lives, and so it takes us away from quibbling about you know what do we think the truth, or
Yeah,
what's the right um group, you know.
totally, totally. And I think he would say that there is no right group. And I was listening to a lecture from Hillman yesterday, and he's another one of these,
Hmm.
mythopoetic sages who is he's often called a Jungian or a post Jungian or whatever. So he comes from this flavor of seeing. But one of the things that he directly uh, did, that I think all of them were doing, but he really harped on this when people would try to ask him, direct questions about
Mhm.
like which interpretation of this myth is best, or whatever, kind of like this question that you're asking.
Mhm.
And what he seemed to lean on most is that it's not about finding the right way, it's about changing your way of seeing.
Mm.
It's about changing your way of seeing as this way of trying to get literal answers and finalize your and concretize your thinking, to opening yourself to this more soulful, mythopoetic, mysterious way of seeing and being overall, because we've lost that. And I think that is more of the natural state of the human mind, because we've always been storytellers. We've
Mm.
always looked at the stars and wondered like what's going on up there. Whether we are just making stories about it, or we were seeing true archetypes in the stars. Like this is just something we've always done. And the modern way of living has kind of robbed us of that birthright. And it's sort of our job, I think, to retrieve that a little bit. And that's why I'm so drawn to these thinkers, because they're non-dogmatic in many ways,
Mm.
where it's like everything's dogmatic, whether
Right.
it's spiritual, philosophical, or just scientific. Like everyone is trying to convince you of something or sell you on something. And it's like, there's something in my psyche, in my soul, that yeah, I want to be convinced. I want to be comforted, I guess, at the end of the day, when it comes to spirituality and philosophy. But really, there's something more. There's like something open ended and mysterious that I need, and the existence of something open ended and mysterious is comforting in and of itself in a strange way.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I love mystery. I just think about like reading, and I love reading growing up, and one of the biggest draws about reading is the mystery, is figuring out what's going to happen, and how is the hero going to solve the the problems, the conflict, and also then how do I do that in my own life, and then also the mystery allows us to be open to what life holds for us, instead of having an expectation that could be let down or whatever, and then that would just not be flexible for what life has. And also um it helps us grow when we can embrace the mystery, and be open to our understanding being shattered, because obviously our understanding is always incomplete. It's always um is corrupt in some ways, to some degree. We don't have the full picture, so we need to have an openness and embrace of the mystery in order to move.
100%. I mean, especially when it comes to these like spiritual and mythological matters, it's like the idea that we can somehow pin the tail on the donkey or like hit the bullseye or something is inherently ridiculous. It's like you're talking about non-physical things. You're
Hmm.
talking about metaphysical, not just ideas, but like concepts that are beyond empirical measurement. So it's like, oh, like we should assume we don't know. We should assume we're not going to be able to like fully figure it out. But it within that like sort of inherently open-ended way of looking at those things, there's still like one of the things that I really really love, and I got this from John Vervaeke, who did like Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and he's a
Mm-hmm. I've
professor
heard
at
of him.
yeah, he's awesome. But it's this Greek idea called anagage. And anagage, I'm hoping I'm using the right word, because there's like all these Greek words sort of like rattling around in my head that I might be confusing. But um, it sort of encompasses this idea, because it's the notion that you can continuously climb the ladder of truth but never arrive.
Mm.
It's like you're always ascending and getting closer, But because these are transcendent ideas, because we are dealing with things beyond the realm of the human intellect, we never get there. But like
Hmm.
you can get closer, and you can continuously get closer and continuously get closer. So I really like that way of looking at it.
Right. And me coming back from a Christian background, God is the ultimate thing. And so if we think of God as something that we can totally understand, then he's not God anymore because he's on our
Right.
level. And
Right.
um, so that doesn't make sense. So it's just another way of understanding that.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I want to get to how you got to where you are now, kind of your upbringing and your belief meanderings.
Yeah. So I grew up mostly with a dad. My parents split up when I was young, and my dad is just an awesome, really open-minded, really open-hearted guy. But coming along with that was a lack of, kind of, we didn't have like a tradition or a like a church we went to every
Hmm.
week. It was just a lot more relaxed, I guess. He worked a lot of hours, and our off time was just pretty chill. So he didn't steer me in any particular direction, and I did maintain a relationship with my mom. I'm totally cool with my mom as well. And it was the same on her side. It was, there was nothing like if we went to church, it was like on holidays or rarely. So, but with that, I always had a spiritual curiosity, and I was always had a just a lens of wonder toward the world in the respect of in all respects of the word, really, like being in awe of the world, but also questioning, like, why do people believe this, why do people
Hmm.
do this, why do people like this, why do people go to this kind of a church, why do people go to this kind of a job, why do they want to do these kinds of things? Because honestly, from my perspective, I do feel like I always had this innate sense of like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that shit, like I don't want to do that kind of a job, I don't want to like
Hmm.
this idea of what's important to people just doesn't really appeal to me or
Hmm.
move me. So
Hmm.
that I think that was the sort of genesis point of the questioning, of the exploring, for looking for the things that would do that, that would scratch that itch. So I feel like I was a kid who asked a lot of questions, but I was not a great student. Like I just wasn't that engaged with school. Occasionally things would come up that would interest me, and then I would take them
Hmm.
very seriously or
Hmm.
like decide I wanted to try hard. But there were a lot of elements that I just could not get into. Um, and then as I got older, I started to get different interests. I knew I wanted to move out of the town I grew up in. I grew up in like the Fox Cities area of Wisconsin. So it was like small ish, not
Hmm.
like super small town, but like 70,000, 60,000 person type city. And there was just nothing going on there that really intrigued me. Like I started getting into music and like wanting to play in bands and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So though I wasn't a great student, I did go to college. I did go to like a state school, and that's the point that I moved out of there and started really exploring more of these interests directly. And one of the first major ways I did that was taking like religious philosophy courses in school and taking regular philosophy courses and Buddhism courses and stuff like that. And then that really started equipping me to use different concepts and language and archetypes to help try to understand these things and just mature my understanding of those things in general. Um, and then this is the point too. I get exposed to like thinkers like Ram Dass and Robert Anton Wilson and uh, Timothy Leary and like people who came from other vantage points of a lot of these big questions. And the guy who taught my religious philosophy class was just so cool. Like he had a very kind of like psychedelic disposition, uh, went through various deep spiritual stages in his life. Like he became a yogi, he became a Sikh for a little while. Like he told us a story about how doing LSD changed his life on the first day of class, which this was pretty taboo back then. Like I was
Wow.
pretty shocked to hear this story, and like, that like really made me understand like what kind of a level this guy was on in terms of like a been there, done that, truly like guard down explorer of the mystery of being alive. And that started to influence me. And then of course podcasts come along and you start hearing these like long rambling philosophical conversations and you're like, holy shit, I could do that. I could just start doing that. um so that's a very abbreviated version, but um those are a lot of the
Hmm.
major bullet points, I think.
Hmm. Right. So it sounds, thinking back to my own upbringing, to me, I often felt kind of like the outcast and never within the group. And it's kind of, you go back to the nature versus nurture thing. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
might be my personality, might be just the way things shook out when I was younger, a little bit of both. But I think that I had an aversion to fitting in the group too much, and I always kind of enjoyed, although it was also lonely and hard, but being on the outside and kind of looking in and being like, do I actually want to mold myself to fit in this group, to do these things,
Yeah.
and to think critically about these groups and these ideas, and the way, the psychology of it, and
Hmm.
is that, what do I think about that? And I think that that gave me an advantage to continue to do that. And I guess you not get sucked into things. And so hopefully not be so dogmatic. Would you say that that was kind of similar to you?
Yeah, I think there's part like I'm a really social person and I love being around like-minded
Mm-hmm.
people for sure. And I love, I played sports growing up and stuff too. I One of the things I really skipped over is I was a like deep into martial arts growing up. Like
Mm.
that was a huge part of my upbringing too. But yeah, there's always been a, I think, rebellious questioning aspect to my personality that I could not relinquish to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there, though I think in my heart of hearts maybe I want to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
There's things I can't let go. Like it's,
Yeah.
if there's ways people are talking or ideas that people are espousing that just don't sit right with me, I can't shut up about it. I can't be the
Right.
person who's just like, yeah, I'm gonna just let you say that even though I deeply disagree. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been and I've learned
Mm-hmm.
when to actually let that knee jerk reaction go over the years, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But along the way, I was way more like, if I
Wow,
didn't think
you
something
were
was,
aggressive and in confrontation. I never would have assumed that about you.
I wouldn't say that I was like confrontational, but I
Mm-hmm.
just, if I truly felt like something was wrong, and I still feel this
Mm-hmm.
way to an extent, like if I feel like something's oversimplified, if I don't feel like someone's thinking critically, if I think someone's ideas are problematic, it's hard not to clap back. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily out of a I want to correct you sentiment. It's like I sincerely, I hope you understand that what you're saying is short-sighted,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of short-sighted, to be kind, things that people say and just repeat. And it's almost like, they don't like, it's really easy to use like political
Mm-hmm.
examples here, but things that you see people say and it's just like, that's not even your idea. Like the only
Right.
reason you're saying that is because it aligns you with a certain social group and a certain thing you want to be
Mm-hmm.
affiliated with. And it's like, it bothers me to hear. It's like insulting to my intellect and to everyone else's intellect to hear you say these things. And yeah, so I've always been that kind of a person.
Yeah, I totally get that. I feel the same way. And it's more like, w- let's think and feel things out critically so that we can have the benefit for all, not just like, hey, I need to correct you because I need. It's not about being right. It's about
Yeah.
being um, being honest and being yeah, thorough in your thinking and how you feel. And I hope that if I say things that people will be like, hey, um, maybe that's not right, or let's think this
Yeah.
out more fully or more nuanced. And so it's like, hey, we sharpen each other.
Yeah, and or at least be honest, because I don't think a lot of people when they're on social media, or they're saying something that sounds like it's merely a signal to fit into some group. Like, I don't care what end of the spectrum you're on. Like, if you see a post, or you see somebody like pandering to some group, it's like that's not even really the way you feel.
Hmm.
It's like a social signal.
Hmm.
It's like some kind of way to comfort some element of your own mind and let other people know where you stand and where you belong. And that to me is like that's like a pair of glasses somebody doesn't understand they're wearing, and
Hmm.
that's like, and this is where people like Robert Anton Wilson are just indispensably awesome, because they give you words like reality tunnel to describe that kind of behavior. It's like
Hmm.
people are stuck in their own reality tunnels, and
Hmm.
oftentimes are not remotely aware of the fact that that little tiny pinprick of light that you're seeing the world to is just that. It's a tiny, tiny little perspective that's completely dependent on your upbringing and all the things you were indoctrinated with, and nature and nurture, as you just pointed out,
Hmm.
and just weird biases you don't care to investigate. And that to me is just disappointing.
Right. Yeah, but at the same time, I get the sentiment, I get the feeling. I still, my psyche wants to do that all the time.
Hmm.
And I can be like, hey, I'm not where I was when I was younger. I've thought about this and I've changed. So now I'm open. Now I'm unbiased. Now I'm this. But sometimes that can be a trap, because it's like, I'm not dogmatic the way I used to be, but now I'm dogmatic about these other ideas and beliefs I have now.
Yeah.
And so you can fall in the same kind of hole. And I mean, I see that in myself and other people as well. And so I think there's there, I think it's all about like comparison. And so it's like, if I can get past where I was and then where I think I am now, and get just not see myself as for or against, but just
Hmm.
kind of in my own place and not comparing myself to others. And also, allowing them to be where they are, because I was once there. But, obviously, if there's a way that I can speak into their life that's helpful, um, I want to take that opportunity. But
Yeah.
just allowing ourselves to be where we're at, and also know that I'm still not there, just like we were talking earlier about the
Yeah.
the great mystery.
Yeah, what does it even mean to be there? Like, I don't ever know where I am. I'm just kind of like reacting in the moment, balancing in the moment, dealing with whatever's in front of me at the moment, thinking about whatever I'm thinking. It's never. I never feel like I'm anywhere. Like, the only way that I can tell you where I am is in reference to other people, or in reference to other ideas.
Mm,
Or this is something that Hillman, I've heard him talk about, the concept of figuring out what tree you're on. It's like if you look around and you're like, aha, there's Plato, there's Jung, there's some of these other
mhm.
thinkers that I've mentioned. I guess this is the tree that I'm on. Like, this is the tree that I feel at home in. And and here's my branch shooting off
Mhm,
of that,
mhm.
which is unique. And I like that. I really like that analogy.
Mhm. Right. One thing that's I found helpful, although it is straining, you could say, is that I find myself kind of in four boxes. I grew up, pretty conservative Christian, and then I kind of found myself rethinking Christianity. And so there's a lot of Christians now that are
Hmm.
deconstructing and then reconstructing. And then there's the people like yourself, Young, Campbell, archetypes, that type of thing. And then there's the full on woo woo. So I find myself kind of, I guess, I'm in the world of conservative Christianity. I wouldn't really put myself in that place anymore. But the last three, I definitely have sentiments and ideas of all those three. And so it's nice to have know people in all four boxes, to help
Mhm.
remind myself of what those are, and the pros and cons, and the what they see and what their blind spot is. Because if I find myself or any other people that kind of start secluding themselves in just their one group that they agree with, then they start to get more blind, and
Oh, yeah.
not see the other people and other groups, and mischaracterize them or simplify their beliefs.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. And I think too I get why people do that because it's like a protection mechanism. It's a way to straw man things that you don't want to be associated with or things that scare you or ways of thinking that run counter to yours. But it's not really like it is uncomfortable. I get it to be confronted with ideas that don't mesh with your way of thinking, with your way of looking at the world, but it's not ever as bad as you imagine it to be.
Hmm.
It's like, do I enjoy listening to really empirical, reductive, physicalist ways of
Hmm.
describing the universe? Like, to an extent, I do, but I always want there to be a deeper punchline. I
Hmm.
always want there to be a deeper mystery that they admit that they don't know.
Right.
But I don't, but I can still enjoy, a talk by somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson. But I think actually to your point, it's when they show their blind spots
Mm.
that I start to wriggle.
Right.
Because as soon as you start to act like you know, and I mean that with a period, like
Hmm.
know,
Right.
it's like no, you don't, no, you don't.
Right. That humility is so enticing. It's like, oh man, they admit that they're human, that they have shortcomings, or they don't know everything, and so that draws you in. And so that's also a challenge. It's like, oh man, I should do the same thing.
A real quick specific example, like I remember Stephen Hawking one time said something to the extent of like, we know enough about the universe now to know that it doesn't need God to exist or something along those lines. And it's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like you have no like theoretical physics. I don't even know a lot about theoretical
Hmm.
physics in terms of the actual technicals, but I know enough to know it's a mess and it's
Hmm.
unfinished and it's incomplete. And there are things that don't work together that have been independently proven in numerous experiments that are even Nobel Prize winning at this point. So to pretend like we understand the functioning of the universe down to like some granular exact level is just insane to me. But anyway, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I went to like an apologetics camp, and there's a lot of things I don't like about it now, but or
Apologetics camp.
oh yeah, so that's just like Christian apologetics, just like why we believe what we believe, and the truth behind it, basically.
Okay.
It was a step in my journey. It was good, but one thing they say is basically that it takes more faith to believe that the Big Bang was just created by chance than by something. Um, and I still find that to me that still makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever heard or like walked through what's often called Aristotle's proof of God, even though it's not really God in like the
Hmm.
Judeo-Christian sense, honestly. But I don't know if I can accurately go through the gist of it now in a way that I would feel good about.
Hmm.
But I revisited it recently and I was like, you know what? I don't know what modern philosophers think about this, but I actually like it. Like I think his his logic holds up to me, and all all of the points, like some of them are a little bit difficult. Like I can see like essentially ideas like universals and archetypes
Hmm.
and uh platonic ideals come into it, and at a certain point you have to like be able to wrap your mind around certain concepts like that. And I can total and that's like the sticking point. A lot of people
Hmm.
who are skeptical um wouldn't be able to get past that. But like the moment you get past that, it implies the rest of his argument in like a bulletproof way, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway,
Yeah, I'll have to check into that.
yeah, I'll share a link with you. I think there's a pretty decent video that I stumbled across on YouTube with like not a lot of views at all, but it was like really well explained.
Oh, great, great. I wanted to go back to you're talking about school and how you weren't a great student, but what you were interested in, you were really interested. I felt the same way.
Yeah,
And kind of talking about being dogmatic. I feel like school and even up to college often teaches you to be dogmatic because school is about teaching you um, what to know rather than how to think. And that's
yeah,
why I love English so much and was an English major in undergrad is because it's more about how to think rather than this is what we know and this is black and white truth that is for sure thing, which
yeah.
is often not the case.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I definitely agree. And Hillman said something really similar to that in that same lecture I was watching yesterday. That we like education is more of like an indoctrination
Mm,
process. And it's funny because now there's this whole like conversation about, progressive Marxist indoctrination in college that's like really popular among
mm-hmm,
certain groups. But even I'm not going there at all. That's not what
mm,
I'm saying. I think that it's an indoctrination of a certain style of thinking. It's an indoctrination of a certain way where you're interrogating reality for an absolute answer. And I
mm,
think in some cases, like this is a type of thinking you need in your disposal and everyone should have.
right.
But there's like clear biases and clear kinds of intelligences that are being ignored when you're exclusively thinking that way. And there's a lot of like, there are people who are like pedagogical experts who recognize this and they're trying to sort of offer alternatives, but it seems like we're a long way from that. And it seems like, unfortunately, the conversation about education is being completely hijacked by cartoon philosophy, like banning books and,
Mm-hmm.
Marxism and shit like that. And it's like, it's hard to see that going anywhere positive in the United States in the short term.
Right, and you bring up a good point. I want to make sure get this across it because we need both. I would say you could say you need the right and left brain, the masculine and the feminine. You need black and white, and you need the gray,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
mystery and for sure things. But it's just our emphasis is on the feminine because uh, the Western world for so long has been so imbalanced towards
Yeah.
the masculine, towards the black and white and the physical and what we think we can know for sure. So it's just it's time for balancing, and I think that we're many people are starting to realize this, and I'm all about how can we balance more? Where can we go from here in the future?
Hmm. No, totally. Totally. And that's, that even cuts right to the core of what people like Jung thought the point of life is to balance accept and balance all aspects of the psyche. Like I said this recently in a video that I put out like that. For
That was
him it
great.
was about it was about wait, what was the exact phrase? It wasn't exactly this, but it was like it's not about purification, it's about inclusion.
Hmm.
So it's not about expelling the dark parts of yourself or the parts of yourself you don't like. It's about directly understanding that I personally have the capacity for all of the things that I hate and all of the things that turn me off. And the more I'm actually to even place more emphasis on that, the more aware I am that a certain type of thing really puts me off, the more I need to investigate where that's coming from in myself and how I can integrate that into my own understanding of my own mind and my own psyche. And that's, man, when you see some of the just super aggressive political posturing that's going on all over the country right now, God, it's just screaming shadow projection, isn't it? It's just screaming like, what are you so afraid of? Like, why are you so afraid of like a kid reading about this other way of being, or even understanding that that way of being exists? You know, it's like we're trying to draw ideological boundaries around states as if that's going to do something. Like, is it really going to, like some of the legislation in Florida and all of the book banning stuff that's going on? It's like, do you really think like the internet exists? Like the fucking internet exists and you're
Uh-huh.
worried about books in a library? Like
Right.
what? Like
Mhm.
it's just crazy. It's so short-sighted and silly and yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about dogmatic. When you're dogmatic, you also it hurts yourself, your inside, in realizing that you're full of contradiction, you're full of
Yeah.
these things, and that so you'll just push those to the side. You'll make them unconscious, and so you won't be aware of them, and then they'll come out in negative ways, which other people can see, and then they'll see that you're not authentic and you're not being honest about yourself, and of course that creates lots of conflict. And I really like what you said, about that. What triggers us is a signal to what we haven't healed, what we haven't looked at inside ourselves. And so, if we can really learn to grow and gain a better perspective, and even say, "Hey, thank you for triggering me. Thank you for revealing inside of me what has been unconscious that I didn't realize that I need to work on," and that can even become exciting in a way. It's like, "Oh man, I found something, and now I can work on it and work past it."
Yeah, ideally. And I think a lot of times I'm certainly not a big enough person a lot of the time to be like, "Thank you for triggering me."
Right.
And
In
I
the
do wanna
moment.
give the caveat that, like, man, I do think that there's some times where people are just wrong and
Mhm.
like, I remember, like, so right on up to, like, I've been in a few situations where I had to, like, fight someone in my life or it was gonna be way worse of a
Mhm.
situation. And, like, that doesn't happen often, but it has happened. And the idea that we can just bypass things by bringing them inside and
Mm.
like into like just somehow just like processing it and like being like, oh, thank you very much. Like I have no illusions. I understand that that's not possible 100% of the time. And there's a situation where you got to punch a son of a bitch right in the fucking face. Like it's just true. But more often than not, man, you're 100% right. And I remember hearing a story one time about, oh man, I wish I could remember what it was specifically. But Jung said something to a patient that came to him and it like really triggered her and like really pissed her off. And she
Mhm.
just got up and like cursed him out and like left the office.
Mhm.
And it took her like multiple years, but eventually she went back. And eventually she was just like, yeah, he was right. Like he was way too curt and he was way too stern. But he was at a point in his life where he didn't care. Like, he was at a
Mm.
point in his life where it's like, "If you're not ready to hear this, go away. I don't care." But when she called and this she's on camera talking about this,
Mhm.
this woman who is the patient. But when she called, Young's secretary was like, "Oh, we knew you'd be calling back eventually." Like, something to that
Wow.
extent, you know?
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So sometimes it's, it's like, yeah, sometimes you can process it and integrate it, and sometimes it'll
Mhm.
take you 5 years,
Mhm.
and that's just the way it is.
Right. Going along with your point, I follow, like psychologist Twitter, and I see that sometimes the flack that psychology gets is focusing so much on the individual and the internal, and hey, learning to deal with this. But it's like, hey, maybe these people have problems because the world is screwed up,
Yeah.
you know. And so, of course, there's only so much we can do externally, and um, the main thing we have to deal with is ourselves and deal with
Yeah.
situations that are not so great. But you're right, and it's a good point that sometimes you need to have those boundaries. You need to step up. You need to confront people and be like, hey, this isn't right. And so it's just, I guess, finding that balance.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's so many things wrong with self-help and popular psychology, and I think usually what it comes down, well, there's a few things it comes down to, but one is oversimplifications, right?
Hmm.
And what we were talking about before, like there is some final answer. There is some thing that's going to fix you, when really I think, like, going back to what we were talking about before with like the lack of an answer, like what Hillman and Young were trying to do is like to get you to actually change your way of seeing yourself and the world. Like, I think that's actually more healing than,
Mm.
in the long run. That's probably more healing. And I'm generalizing again. Like, some
Hmm.
people need medication, some people
Right.
need everything under the sun, right?
Hmm.
But in the long term, isn't what you like, what would appear to be more like a finish line, wouldn't it be feeling more individuated in your own skin? Wouldn't it be seeing the world in a more mysterious, divine way, and not just saying you do, but feeling it? Like,
Hmm.
and that requires like a transmutation of consciousness. Like, that requires a transmutation of the ego from this selfish, thing that sucks in resources and to keep protects itself, to shining out like the rays of the sun and being and feeling true love and feeling true altruism toward the world, and like that's what I think we really need to be after. And a medication's not going to do it. A therapeutic technique on its own is not going to do it.
Hmm.
It's like an overall desire on the part of both the practitioner and the person helping guide the practitioner to get them there, over years. And
Hmm.
that does not jive with a good product. It doesn't jive with like a good social media post a lot of the time. It's like
We want the
no
quick
one wants to
fixes.
hear. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Going back to the first part, what you're saying, and going back to my tradition, Jesus actually he asked a lot more questions than he answered,
yeah,
and he often spoke in parables, and so it wasn't super straightforward, and he kind of left it up for people to. It's like if they're open, if they're interested in, they can think about his parables and um, really think about what they mean, and if they're not, they can go their own way. But yeah, just asking more questions, asking probing questions, rather than be like, hey, this is black and white, or this is what you do in this situation. He spoke more in kind of like a Campbellian way
yeah,
of, these are the symbols, the truths that you can apply in your life, in your own situation, because depending on the situation, it's going to be different. And that's what we have such a hard time with, is that we think, hey, in all situations it's this way,
hmm,
but it really just, there's so much more nuance to it. And kind of going back to the end about, hey, we want quick fixes, we want easy black and white answers, but life is a lot more complex than that.
yeah. It for sure is. So I know you've kind of alluded to the fact that you had like a strict Christian upbringing,
Hmm.
excuse me, but that your way of seeing has kind of changed. How would you describe that way of seeing now, and what is your relationship like with not just that way of that you grew up, but like how, I guess, how has your understanding of Jesus, of Christianity, how has that changed over time, if at all, if you
Mm-hmm.
still associate with it?
Yeah, I think for there's a Catholics and the Protestants, right?
Right.
And so Richard Rohr kind of goes into this, and he says
Yeah,
that
he's awesome.
after,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, awesome, you know about him. He said after the Enlightenment, people were like, hey, we have logic, we have science, we don't need religion anymore. And then Christianity kind of freaked out. We're like, oh no, we need things that are very solid, that we can hold on to, that we can be like, hey, this is from God, and it can compete with your science. And so the Catholics, they said, we have authority, we have the Pope, he was appointed by God. They tell us what God said and what's true. And then Protestants, like, we have the Bible. This is um this is basically God's word. Everything in it is like correct and gives us the answers. And so um, basically, we became too black and white and too um, inflexible. And so um, for me, it was just realizing, and I would say that I'm probably on the more liberal extreme side in uh, seeing the Bible, and that I think it was just written by men to understand God the best they could, and I think they improved over time within the books of the Bible. But you know, I think that even the New Testament, there may be some errors or some ideas that weren't correct, and so once I kind of came to that belief, and it's not just even you can come to an intellectual belief, but your emotions and your body has to catch up to that. And once I became
Yeah.
comfortable with that in myself and cut those trauma bonds with it, you could say,
Yeah.
it just became so much more freeing. And I think universalism was another thing, and just believing that, in whatever way, in whatever sense, I think that everybody will eventually be reconciled with God, um, in oneness with God in heaven, or whatever, however you want to think about that.
Yeah.
Um, that just gave me so much more freedom, and kind of exploring um different religion, different traditions, different people, and seeing that, hey, everybody bears the image of God, and everybody or not people can find truth in meaning, and live great lives whether they're Christian or not, and
Yeah.
that the world isn't separate from secular and sacred. It's everything is sacred. God is within all things.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that interpretation for sure. And I'm definitely more on that like perennial philosophy
Right.
side of things.
And I just want to say that I think my tradition, and a lot of people I grew up with are not so dogmatic or have all these beliefs that are traditionally associated with conservative Christianity. Uh, so yeah, I think sometimes, certain things growing up in your life can it kind of skewed maybe like how I gravitated towards certain things, or just being aware of um, the culture of conservative Christianity overall more than maybe
Yeah.
some other people in my tradition, even, or within my church. And so I had to. It was like there's our church bubble, and then there's a conservative bubble, and then there's the greater Christian bubble, and then everything else. And so I had to go through all these bubbles to get a bigger perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I think you said the key word, which is culture. And I think that's key because culture ends up hijacking and repurposing things for
Mm,
its own ends.
right.
And then you begin to have something that goes by a name, but if you compare it to earlier iterations of that thing, it's not really recognizable other than we're using the same words like Jesus. We're reading the same books, kind of, because you have to like get through the barrier of like translations
Hmm.
and mistranslations and like to a point where the whole thing is so obfuscated that you wonder if you're missing something core
Hmm.
about the book. And that doesn't even like bring into the conversation all of the like apocryphal texts that were
Right.
like taken out of quote unquote the Bible or
Hmm.
put in or not put in. And when you don't see these things growing up, like you're blinded in ways that you don't even understand. And then
Hmm.
as you get older, you either have to willingly choose to stay blind to those things, or you have to be like, hey, I'm on this anagogic path we talked about before where I'm trying to honestly get closer to truth. And I think some of these ideas are keeping me more trapped in Plato's cave than they are getting me closer to that transcendent light source. And that's something that everyone has to be super honest with themselves about. You know, like if your cultural heritage is preventing you, stunting your own intellectual and spiritual growth, like you're the only person that can break yourself out of that, you know? And it doesn't mean you have to like completely disassociate with it or completely leave it behind. In some cases, it probably does, but it means that you need to do something more. You need to ask questions. And sometimes there might be questions that people in your group don't want you to be asking. And if that's the case, you probably should ask them harder, you know, because look at Jesus himself. Like Jesus was definitely rebellious. He was definitely an
Hmm.
outcast. He was definitely going against the grain of society to the point that they killed him for it.
Hmm.
And it seems like every major truth seeker was that we remember today was like pushing that same button. Like the
Right.
same thing happened to Socrates. Like, you know, it's that's really getting to the truth is going to piss people off. It doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter like what affiliation they have. Like there's a level of truth no one wants to go to. Like there's a
Hmm.
level of if you dig hard enough into corruption, you know it's going to and you go to Washington DC, you know it's going to come out in the sludge a giant mixture of Democrats and Republicans. You know, it's not going to
Hmm.
be one or the other. They're all at the end of the day worshiping the same master, the same dollar. And I think this is true regardless of what cultural tradition you're looking at, whatever hierarchical structure you're looking at. Like the truth transcends the structure. It doesn't mean the
Hmm.
structure is inherently bad. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be structure, but the truth always transcends the structure. And you have to look at the limitations of the structure. And it's clear to me that American conservative evangelical Christianity is nothing resembling the original structure or the whole of the
Hmm.
truth. And
Right.
when you try to get closer to the whole of the truth, I think it gets a lot more interesting. And I'm way more interested in
Yeah.
that interpretation of Christianity,
Right.
where you start really getting to the core archetypes that it's playing with. Like it's really like an alchemical allegory of how you get a base metal or a regular human consciousness and somehow it transcends it transmutes into something transcendent and it
Hmm.
becomes god now and it's no longer the thing that it started as. It's fundamentally of a different nature. And when you start thinking about it more in that way, it becomes, at least to me, a lot more compelling.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm really into the mystics, and I think that they were the closest to the right path, you know, and them realizing that it's not about the mind and the theologies we form. It's about that relationship with the transcendent, with God, and that feeling, and them having, you know, doing that meditation and doing these spiritual practices and having this experience with God that help them realize that this is something indescribable. It's something transcendent. It's beyond words and concepts. And so anything we say is going to be incomplete of that. And so they can hold, um, you know, theology and all these things loosely, knowing that it's not going to be complete. And for myself, in my own journey, um, it took an awakening, an experience of oneness with God myself to get past um, thinking more dogmatically and trying to fit everything within the traditions and boxes that I had grown up with. And you know, I do have compassion for people because it's like your boxes are your rock of your foundation of your beliefs, and so once that is gone, then you're like, well, what am I holding on to? And it just feels so like you're free falling, you know. It
Hmm.
feels so scary and dark, and that's why people have the dark night of the soul, which I did have for like 6 years. And so it kind of took me reading some other things and seeing connections to my own experience to be like, hey, I can trust my experience. I can trust that it was a real experience that was a more foundational level of truth than what I had previously known. And so not that all my interpretations might be 100% correct about that experience, but that experience itself was truly transcendent. And so I can rest on that, and that feeling of love and oneness with God as foundational for myself.
Mhm. How did that happen?
Um, I mean, I was in grad school. I wasn't doing very well mentally, emotionally, and I was really just trying to improve my mental and emotional self and relationship with God. But I felt like I was kind of failing. Kind of feel like I was at the end of my rope. Feeling like being 24 and in grad school, and just I'm a failure, and that I'm not. I don't know. I don't see a way forward. It's just kind of black. And um and then I kind of talked about this in my first episode about my faith journey, but um I read do you know Brain Pickings, that website? Have you ever heard of it?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, I was reading an article on that website about trauma, and it just really struck me as true. And I kept reading articles, and I read it from 8 in the morning till 4:30 at night.
Wow.
And I would say that it was kind of it was cathartic. It was realizing that I'm not alone, and that other people are going through the same things I am or have, and these great writers, these great philosophers, and that, like you said, they're finding a way to transmute and alchemize their pain and their struggles, and find meaning and find purpose, and find love. And there's connection between these different things. There's a oneness within it all. And so all of that was just really resonating with me. And I kind of felt it building up in my body, and just like this buzz, and you say this compassion and love for myself. And like, why am I being so hard on myself? Why
Yeah.
I, it's all this, growing up, all this trauma, this expectations I had within myself, whether or not that was actually true, that people had these expectations. I felt it within myself. And so kind of letting all that go. And so I finally realized that it was really late. So I went up to my room and was doing this body meditation, and that I just started shaking uncontrollably. And I just felt like I connected my brain with my body. And it was just the biggest feeling of joy, love, ecstasy, whatever, and oneness with God. And yeah, that's kind of a transformational point in my life.
Cool, man. Yeah, that really that's a cool I've never heard of a story quite like that where you're sort of sucked in to the gestalt of everybody's
Mm.
existential suffering and
Right.
realizing that that's like a rite of passage, and that in
Hmm.
and of itself is like a sacred thing that every thinking person eventually deals with. And then you feel like you're a part of this like ocean of
Mm.
that longing, and then
Mm.
being connected to so many other people in that longing is a very sacred thing in and of itself. And yeah, it's crazy how like certain things just like we could intellectually like talk about these things, but then they just somehow hit you in a very
Mm.
personal, very profound way. And yeah, I've had experiences like that too, man, where it's like a cliche that we've all been aware of for years and years, like comes home to roost in your own heart or something. And it's like, oh fuck, this is why that's a cliche, because
Right. It's
it's
like
like,
like Richard Ward, for example. He came on my radar when I was an undergrad, and I would read his stuff on Facebook, and I'd be like, "This guy is interesting. I'm not sure what I think
yeah.
about him. He's dangerous. Like, he's saying
Mm.
some stuff I don't know about this guy." And then now I'm like, "Oh man, Richard Rohr is great. I love this guy."
Yeah, he I don't know a ton about him, but I've heard some podcasts with him and just seen some stuff with him over the years, and he always just seems like a very loving, very open-hearted person.
Hmm.
And I know he's more of like a of the more like mystical
Yes.
persuasion for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so I just, I guess going from here, I feel like my podcast is trying to help people, um, get from point A from to point B, to become more open. All these things that we're talking about, to be less dogmatic, to find the nuance, and um, to have these conversations with people in these different areas, and these different this more open mystical space. And I guess dissolve the kind of lines, the dogmatic lines, and so um, and also look at the future and how can we become less dogmatic, less black and white, and embrace that feminine and
Mhm.
less materialistic, capitalistic in our society. And so I was just curious, and do you feel like for your podcast that you have an aim or a goal?
Not directly, but I do think similarly. I think there's probably the two, like a two-pronged answer if I'm being realistic. One is the sort of just selfish angle of like, I enjoy it. I love the fact that I get to talk to the type of people I get to talk to. Like when I look at the list of people I've talked to, it's kind of funny sometimes. I'm like, I don't know how the fuck I got myself into a position where I'm talking to like psychiatrists from Harvard and
Mhm.
Yale and best-selling authors and like, whatever. I'm not trying to like name drop or whatever,
Mhm.
but it really is amazing to just be able to talk to these like intellectual heavyweights and people who the world really looks to for sense making and like
Mm.
respects as authorities in their field. So that's just super cool. But then the other selfish element is it helps me in my own journey of sense making. And I think that ultimately that's what I hope it's doing for other people to at least some small extent is to just give them an outlet that is being presented in a truly non-dogmatic way with no underlying agenda or
Mm.
whatever, where they can actually just go for a consistent, multifaceted presentation of wonder. And I also try to, like I go into I have like varying bouts of wanting to make it more directly mirthful and comedic and
Mhm.
silly because that's
Mhm.
actually a huge part of my personality. But I never want to force that stuff either. I
Mm.
don't ever want to
Right.
like, try to like put put jokes where they feel forced or whatever. But
Mhm.
I think the lightheartedness is a hugely missing part of a lot of this stuff too,
Mhm.
because philosophy, spirituality, religion, it's so devoid oftentimes of humor or it takes itself way too seriously in a lot of
Mm.
cases. And I never want to do that. So that's a huge part of the way that I try to approach a lot of these big questions is with a disposition of playfulness and sort of not quite tricksteriness because I'm not trying to like turn it inside out and like
Right.
make it seem
Jester.
ridiculous if it's profound, but an element of that always,
Mhm.
where as soon as you think you're starting to understand, good time to take a step back and realize like, oh yeah, there's a billion other things that I now don't understand because
Right.
of just
Mhm.
like the way that the nature of the mind and understanding works.
Mm.
Um, so that's a long-ish, rambling-ish answer, but
That's
Um,
great.
the other thing too is just for sure, I think I'm in that lineage too of trying to just encourage people to not search for easy answers, but change their way of seeing, like we were talking about with Hillman and Young and Campbell before. Is like I just think that's so important and so missing from the discourse at large. Where by and large, everyone wants to tell you what to think. Like
Mm.
whatever TV channel you turn on, for news or whatever. Like everybody wants to tell you what to think. Everyone wants to tell you who's wrong. Everyone wants to tell you who's ridiculous and doing terrible things. And very few people are trying to draw your attention to the mystery, the majesty, the
Mm.
wonder that's all around at all times. And like that's the thing. Like I thought you were gonna ask me like what advice would I have to give people?
That would also
And
be great.
and it feels like the most rebellious thing that I can possibly say while also being totally honest is trust yourself. Trust the people, trust the world, just trust. Just go
Mm.
through your life trusting. And I'm not saying be stupid. I'm not saying like don't trust your gut or don't like listen to the voice in your head that's like, don't do that. That's part
Mhm.
of trusting yourself. Like
Mm.
if you are walking down the street and you feel a little like, don't do that, don't go there, whatever, trust that. But also, by and large, walk through life in a more trusting, more open hearted, even more vulnerable way.
Mm.
Because I think more often than not, you'll be surprised. all of the way that we've been conditioned, all of the ways we've been conditioned to think about the world and think about threats and think about other people's bad intentions. It's not an accurate portrayal of the way the vast majority of the world and people are at all.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's literally the name of my podcast is Becoming Who We Are. And
Oh,
I would
good,
say
cool.
that, we are fractals of God. We have the spirit of God within us. We have that love, joy, peace within us. That is our true essence, and that guidance, and that curiosity, that creativity, that mystery, all that stuff. And so I do think that often religion, or different these different systems, they say, hey, trust trust the system, trust everything but yourself, basically.
Right.
And I know a lot of Christians quibble because they're like, oh, when they say yourself, they think of your ego, what is corrupt. But I think that's a misunderstanding of who we truly are. So I say trust yourself. I would say to them, trust the Holy Spirit within you. um, and
Yeah.
and the more we can get in our body and incorporate all the wholeness, the emotions, the intuition, the logic, all of that, and not push that to the side. I think that we have a, oh man, we can't ask these questions, or we can't have these feelings, or we just put so much in the shadow because we have this image of God that's punishing, that's wrathful, that is angry, and so we got to push the shadow side of ourselves below, and so we get disconnected. And I think that kind of goes into, I was thinking the other day, in our world today, we have so much information, so much bombardment in our senses that we didn't have in the past. And so
Hmm.
I think it puts people in a fight or flight response, and just like there's so much. And then because of people are not connected to their body, not connected to their inner knowing, um, they're just like, I got to cling to what I know, and whatever group I'm in, because if I go into these other areas, then I'll get lost, or um, it's evil, whatever. And so uh, that is the way to navigate this, is to get in your body, and trust, have that trust, and realize that you know obviously there's evil and there's corruption, all that stuff, but at the core of everything, there's good. And if we can recognize that oneness, then we can navigate these with a lot more trust, and openness, and less fear.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And I really like what you said about the trusting whatever you like, the divine within yourself, whatever you want to call it, because this is one of the reasons, many things I love about Plato is, his recognition that the self is not just this simple, clean, singular thing. Like he famously divided the soul into
Hmm.
three parts. And as you gain this introspective, I guess, wisdom about yourself and about your own mind and where things are coming from, you're going to recognize when they're coming from the more animal,
Hmm.
ego-based self, and you're going to recognize when it's coming from a higher place. And that's part of trusting yourself. Part of trusting yourself is knowing, like, this is my ego talking,
Hmm.
this is me feeling wounded, this is me being selfish, and that's an emotion I'm feeling, but that's not what's to trust. Like, I'm trusting the higher part of myself that can,
Right.
like, see through that miasma and see through that emotional illusion. That's part of trusting yourself too. And that's like a deeper kind of self-trust that I think people naturally develop over time, but I think some people also naturally resist
Hmm.
because they're like, no, I'm justified in my feelings, I should
Hmm.
be mad, I should take out my anger, I should take out
Hmm.
um so yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's like, this is like the conclusion essentially that people like Jung reached, is like, in a time where, to your point of what you brought up before, where we're post scientific enlightenment and the Nietzschean adage has become famous about God
Hmm.
being dead. It's
Hmm.
like, in a time like that where all of the knowledge is available, where you can read all of the works of wisdom throughout the ages and you can read all the science or ignore this, embrace that, you're driving. Like you are driving and you don't get to like lay off your responsibility to someone else. So wherever you're at, in whatever position, how disadvantaged or advantaged, like you're driving and you have to individuate to the best of your ability. And your ability to do that within yourself will serve as a beacon for everyone around you to either
Mm,
do it or not do it themselves. And like that's the best we can do. I really think that's the best we can do. And it's crazy because he was saying that like I don't know when like he started getting more down that road, what year it was, but let's just be 70 or 80 years he's been saying that. And Campbell's probably was saying it 40 or 50 years ago. And nothing, I don't think anything's changed. I think
mhm,
we're, if anything, I think it's become more true now. And I'm trying to figure out ways like myself that I can make that even more modern and more potent because
mm,
it's just getting truer. Like
right.
we have new outs, new ways to avoid personal responsibility, new ways to make things easier for ourselves all the time, and it's getting easier and easier and easier to take a lack of personal responsibility for all
Mm.
of these things. And man, you really got to find a way to connect with a higher part of yourself that wants to transcend that easy path and the easy answers if you want to feel like you're living a meaningful life, I think.
Yeah, totally. But on the opposite end, these easier pathways, ultimately lead to more suffering.
Yeah.
And the more suffering, the more we're like, hey, maybe this isn't the way, and can lead us to better paths and to looking within yourself, which is what happened to me.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think we're getting to that point. We're unveiling the shadows within ourselves and within society, and obviously it looks very dark. But I think that ultimately it's going to lead to a better place. And that's one of the questions I had for you. Do you think that there is an evolutionary growth to humanity? Are we getting better over time, or worse, or is it just both?
I truly grapple with these kinds of questions and the question about like is there an awakening happening or is there not? It's like I honestly really feel like the answer is like the the trickster showing its face where it's like it's both. It's
Mm,
really both. And it's not as simple as we're evolving and we're heading to some singularity point of transition and transcendence, or we're completely melting away into stupid, blubbering, hijacked modes of being where we're just going to be like these Wally beings rolling around and like, obese bodies and like
Wally.
in
Yeah, yeah.
in like yeah AI driven wheelchairs or
Mhm.
whatever. Like but I really do feel like it's some weird yin and yang of those two things, that it's like both ends of that spectrum are possibilities within every individual. And when you think of it that way, it's like which way do you want to at least try to tip the scale?
Mm,
Like there is no macro evolution without individual revolution. And that's what I just always come back to is like it's a case by case basis. And that said, I do think that there is some kind of macro process unfolding and it's interesting to think about. And it's whether it actually exists ontologically out there or not, it certainly appears like there's some macro hive building process occurring on a human level. If you looked at the behavior of humans from a planetary viewpoint and you did a time lapse, like clearly it would look like we're building some kind of techno hive, right? Like
mm.
we're evolving some kind of technological either life form or nest or something, but who knows where that's coming from. um I guess it's just the maximum tangibility is always going to be at the self level. It's like
Mm,
that's the level where you can make a difference right now or not,
right.
you know.
Hmm. Yeah, tickles our wonder whiskers, as
It
one of your
do. It
phrases,
do.
to look
It
at the
do that.
macro.
Yeah,
But you're
absolutely. I
right.
love
The
it.
the change comes from within and within ourselves. And yeah, if you just trying to make the change externally, but you still have a lot of dysfunction within yourself, you're just gonna corrupt it even more, which is we see that a lot in society.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll be the first to admit, man, I take the low road all the time. I
right.
I eat the thing I shouldn't eat. I do the thing I shouldn't do. But I also try to be real with myself when I've done that too much, or I've made too many excuses for myself, or I've been lazy long enough. There's always the moment where I'm like, it's time to get off my ass.
Hmm.
It's time to do something.
Right.
Like it's time to give it an effort. It's time to go to the gym. It's time to fast. It's time to stop drinking coffee. It's time to, put the work in when I don't feel like it. I always end up getting like I'm kind of a better late than never type of person if I'm honest with you.
Yep.
Just like I was in school, it's
Hmm.
like there's always that like come to Jesus moment, so to speak, of like, are you going to be that person or are you going to be that person? And I think as long as you decide to take the high road eventually, you're good.
Right.
And if you're listening to this, it's not too late.
Yeah, never too late. I mean, the part of my story, talking about back in grad school before my awakening, the first year was me, um, n- not was messing around, and doing things I shouldn't because I was freaking out. I didn't. I was in grad school. I was away from my parents. I had all these issues. And it took me, at the end of the year, I was like, man, what have I been doing? Like, who am I? Like, this is not me. And so, then I worked to make that change the second year. Um, and I mean that, the pattern continues. It's a spiral. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that's great. So it seems like, kind of society, is coming to the end of our understanding, with quantum physics, consciousness, all these types of things. It's coming to the end of being able to know these things, through materialism, through the scientific, method, these
Mhm.
tools that have been created to measure physical reality. Um, do you? Well, okay, that's my bias. That's what I think. Do you think that that is true, or do you think that there's just more to physical reality that we have not, um unearthed yet?
I for sure think it's both, but I think you're right in that it seems like our theoretical models have broken down, and we've been searching for new theoretical models. And this comes from conversations with people way smarter than me who have explained.
Don Hoffman.
Um, yeah, Don Hoffman for sure. But even when you just like do like if you can plant your butt in a chair and like wrap your mind around certain foundational quantum mechanics ideas like non-locality and different of course there's like the famous double slit experiment and all of that kind of stuff, but the idea that your theoretical models cannot hold the deeper truths about reality or the inconvenient truths about reality that we're eventually going to uncover. So I think that's part of it. And I think science is eventually going to find new theoretical models that allow for all of these things. And we're in that kind of process right now where we're in this transitory process between, saying, well, it's either relativity or it's quantum physics. And now we've fully admitted that quantum physics is real and that there does need to be a new theoretical
Mm,
framework that permits for both, etc. But so I think that's true. But I also think that no matter how small of a pixel you can shrink reality down into,
mhm,
the symbolic, the mythopoetic, the psychological, the subjective is never going to be captured in that pixel.
mm,
Like I don't understand how it could be.
right.
And maybe I'm wrong, but like maybe the only way that I really can the only path toward that I can see is if we master the human brain to such a deep level that we can engineer any experience from point A to point B where it's
Mm,
like, see, this is what it is.
mm.
But even then you have
We've
the
been
a
trying.
priori. Yeah, right. But even then you have the a priori mystery of like, why do we have this brain? Like
Mm,
what why is the brain able to have these experiences? And why is there this interiority, this subjectivity, this hard problem of consciousness to begin with? And I don't see how you answer those questions with increasingly complex math and theoretical models that now allow for things like quantum non-locality or
mhm.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Which is why I have put my faith, or well, I'll say this: I have dived into phenomenology, and I think that's valuable and important, and that's where part of me goes full woo woo, you know. um,
Mhm.
and I know like you had an episode a while back with your friend who has encountered an alien, and I also had an episode two episodes back about ETs, and so I know that you also dip your foot in there, but you don't go full on woo woo. And so my question is that I can see how that is, like we've been talking about, where you're at now is a position of openness and you could say
Mhm.
humility. But on playing devil's advocate, do you think it could be an unwillingness to take a leap of faith into going full woo woo?
Um, which friend were you talking about?
Oh man, I don't remember the name. It
Was it
was
like just someone who saw a UFO or somebody who like I don't remember ever having like a friend who was like I had like a being encounter, but
it
other than like maybe
it was
psychedelically.
Craft, I think. I think it
Okay,
was.
yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense. Yeah. Well, not I don't think it's the latter of being not having enough faith. I just truly don't feel like because as soon as you start talking about these things that exclusively happen in the realm of the subjective, it's like I you can't dismiss it
Mhm.
as if it doesn't matter. It clearly matters because it's an experience that you're having that feels important to the person that it's happening to. And I think it is important to the person it's happening to, but it's also not literal. It's also like not necessarily a thing that is exogenously coming to your mind. It could be a phenomenon of your mind. It could be part of the
Right.
phenomenology of experience, but that could be an internally generated
Mhm.
experience. So
Mhm.
this is the paradox of like doing inward facing work or having a psychedelic experience or having a mystical experience is it's like at the end of the day I don't know the reality of what is happening here. Like I could
Mhm.
be wrong in all of my leanings that like, where for instance, I think consciousness is a phenomenon. I think the hard problem of consciousness is real. I'm open to the idea of living in a universe that could be called an idealist
Mhm.
universe or a universe where consciousness is like an a priori phenomenon of
Mhm.
material or maybe a panpsychist coexistent situation where you both have consciousness and material
Mhm.
tied in some kind of
Mhm.
unbreakable relationship or
Mhm.
whatever the case may be, but I just don't know.
Mhm.
So and I don't know in the same token before I was talking about how you'll never be able to explain the subjective, the mythopoetic away. I also don't think you'll be able to like empirically prove it because
Mhm.
how can you empirically prove or disprove a thing that's not material? You know what I'm saying?
Right,
So it's like
yeah.
so I always hold space for like I find X to be highly intriguing, but I just don't know. Like I can't what how could I know?
Mhm.
That's the sort of double-edged sword of subjectivity and I think just being like approaching it with honesty. Like
Mhm.
that's just what feels the most honest to me.
Right. No, I think that's a great place to be, and I really respect that. And I'm somewhat there too. I think for me, it feels like that there could be, the amount of body of evidence of people, going back to the ETs, like, hey, the government,
Oh yeah.
they've seen it, they've claimed it, um, and then these other people have, and there's all these, and so it's like the body of evidence, um, and then also the multitude of ways uh, of encounters with
Hmm.
these beings and crafts and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
It's like, again, going back to, like, I think it would take more faith to not believe in it. Now, again, like you said, we can still quibble about what are these experiences, what are our interpretations of them correct, but we are having these experiences, and so um, there is something to it, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I think so too, and I think the scale is tipping in the way that you're describing, where it's becoming more likely than unlikely now,
Mhm.
and you have to like change the unlikely argument because there is so much more evidence coming from authorities that previously denied it. So
Mhm.
you either have to so now the likely unlikely explanation becomes that they're presenting false information knowingly.
Mhm.
So they're either knowingly presenting false information
Mhm.
or it's true. And I think now it's more likely that it's true. At least it's some
Mhm.
level of true than it used to be. Whereas before you had all of these potentially dubious information sources like presenting the case, and then there'd be some that were more compelling than others. And now it's like, okay, well, now all of the traditional power holders are saying it's real. So where do we go from here? Like either
Mhm.
they're lying now for some because they're trying to hide super advanced technology or for other reasons we don't understand, or it's just it's real to an extent. And I definitely lean way more toward the UFO phenomenon being real than not real. I mean, there's
Mhm.
just so much evidence and so many like pieces of empirical data that point to it being real.
Right, right. And so I guess kind of zooming out from that, it seems that our bias that there's more than the physical, and that we have to contend with that. I appreciate the woo woo embracing that, and um trying to wrestle with that. And now, some are better than others. Some are more um, logical or grounded or whatever. And trying to hold that nuance in both.
Hmm.
Um, and so I appreciate those more. So it's a wide spectrum, obviously, but I think that these extra phenomenon, psychic psychic things, all this stuff is something that we need to grapple with, and I think we're starting to. Um, and so I appreciate that Woo Woo is doing that wholeheartedly, and so it tickles my wonder whiskers, and satisfies my curiosity. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that part of that is kind of going back to how can we integrate these things into society to create a better future for ourselves.
Yeah, so how can we begin to take seriously some of these more fringe things in a way that's actually useful? It is
Yeah.
hard. It's a hard question, man, because I myself like I come down in an open-minded, but I just don't know
Mhm.
position on a lot of these specific things. So things like energy healing, things like Reiki, there's always a part of me that's like internally, if not literally eye rolling when I hear certain things because there is a line, right? I think
Mhm.
everybody knows there's a line. It's like,
Mhm.
where is the line? Is the line at energy healing? Is the line at people who say they're star seeds or that they're of Pleiadian
Mhm.
extraterrestrial origin? I mean, for me, for sure, the line is like somewhere before that stuff. Like,
Uh-huh.
again, I don't completely dismiss anything, but you start to like shrink the scope of what seems possible and realistic to a pretty remote level where it's like I can't put a lot of energy or time into this unless something crazy happened to me personally where now I can't deny it.
Right.
And that's kind of where I land in a lot of those things. And I just think I think really my answer is that it's tempting to like lump things together,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but we probably shouldn't. We probably
Right.
shouldn't say like how can we take this group of things and bring it more into the mainstream. I think it's a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the cream will eventually rise to the top on the things that are real and useful, and things like blue avians and like, you know, lizard overlords will probably remain relegated to the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
Though with all this extraterrestrial stuff, who the fuck knows? Maybe not. Could be wrong.
Right, right. I think that's good because you know, tradition I came from, you know, you could say is so grounded that they're not open or aware of all this other stuff. But on the flip side, all the woo woo, they're so into all these things that they're often not grounded, and it's like, yeah, man, you may be into this stuff, but you know, are you paying your rent? Are you know, you're not functioning very well.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
I
and
think just that, yeah, that balance of being grounded but also being open and to the possibilities.
yeah, it's such a slippery slope toward the exact same thing I was talking about earlier, where you become you like you were saying, you develop these blind spots where a lot I think a lot of people end up in these places we were just talking about through a sort of reactionary
Mm, right.
path where they come from a tradition like yourself where alternatives were strictly banned,
Hmm.
and then they come into contact with these alternatives and they get interested and they start to feel like they're growing away from their old way of being. And sometimes they had a traumatic exit. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, there are so many cases of like abuse or whatever where they swing back the complete other direction. They become atheists. They want nothing to do with it. They think
Hmm.
everybody who's a spiritual leader is like a pedophile and whatever. And I empathize with all of these things, and I see myself like to some extent in many of these things.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's like I think there is a point where you begin to develop blind spots, and your own bias is pulling you in directions that don't actually serve the truth, or you're even just a search for clarity, and you're
Hmm.
clinging on to things that are comforting and interesting, but they're not. The possibility that they're real is probably pretty remote. Like the other day, someone told me that they're like, "Oh, I think it was you're a blue ray or something like that," which is a
Hmm.
kind of
I haven't
like
heard
in
that
the
one.
realm of star seeds.
Okay.
But like someone commented that on one of my videos, and I was
Hmm.
just like, "Ooh, what's a blue ray?" So like I go down this rabbit hole of like, and it's funny because some of the descriptors I do feel like fit me,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it's like the idea that like I'm of some extraterrestrial origin. It's like there's some part of my ego that wants to believe that. Like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
special. I'm a
Right.
special blue ray from whatever star system that
Hmm.
comes from.
Hmm.
But it's like, is that really likely? Not
Hmm.
really, you know? Like,
Right. I think yeah, just keeping that humility and that openness, but also a healthy skepticism is good. And part of me is like, uh, if we can do that, hold it with some, you know, a grain of salt, then we can still benefit from the uh, hope and vision that it holds. Like that's what I worry about with atheists is like, where are they getting their hope? Where are they getting their meaning for life? And you know, too much skepticism is just all destruction and you know, harmful for yourself and for society. And so of course blind faith, you know, also leads to cults. So
yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I get that, man.
Do you have ideas about what you think could help society change and grow in the future? Maybe we've already covered some of this, but
Yeah, yeah, to an extent, but I think there is definitely a meaning crisis happening. There is definitely a spiritual crisis happening. There's definitely a soul sickness happening that I don't see there being really great options presented for.
Hmm.
And I think it's kind of unsatisfactory to say what I've said already in terms of like it comes down to the individual,
Right.
though it does. It does, but I also think that at large there needs to be a shift in the way that we view people and view ourselves. Like
Hmm.
there certainly is not a leading with like ICU as a being, hopefully that's at a minimum a human, like a multi-dimensional human, but we
Sorry, you
should at
said
least
ICU?
like as in like we should be able to see other people as a multi-dimensional human at the very least, but I
Hmm.
really think we should be able to see every single human as a spiritual being
Right.
living their life. And when you develop that sort of mythopoetic mystical lens that it seems like every mystical tradition eventually leads to, which is that we're all kind of shards of the same divinity, and we're have this separation of um this dualistic illusion.
Hmm.
If you can really get behind that idea, it flavors the way that you talk to people at the coffee shop. It flavors the way that you interact with people in mundane
Hmm.
everyday interactions, and I think that that's the place we ultimately need to get to. And it doesn't require dogma, it doesn't require
Hmm.
even any kind of literal belief. It just requires that that's like somehow built into the way that we operate before anything else. I mean, that should obviously come before political affiliations. It should come before opinions,
Mm.
in my opinion. But
Yeah, I totally agree. Have you heard of the book Infinite Games?
I've heard of it, yeah, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
Okay. I haven't either. Okay, so putting that out there. But my friend, from what he talked about, it said that it's just basically finite games are, the individual and, what can satisfy me in the moment. Where infinite games is what benefits the whole and what is ultimately satisfactory. And I just think that that's such a simple,
Yeah.
great way to look at things to really improve yourself and the collective as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've talked to Godzi a bunch about this book at some point, but it was a while ago. If I recall, he said something to the effect of like, "There's only one infinite game. There's myriad finite games, but there's
Mhm.
only one infinite game." And I think the larger point is that all of the finite games happen within the context of the infinite game,
Mhm.
and we should view the finite games accordingly.
Mhm.
I think that that's not the whole point, but that's like partially the point that I
Right.
think fits our scope of the conversation right now. And I totally agree. It's like, but we don't, the problem is we're so stuck in our own little finite games that we don't think about the infinite game. I think that can be hard to do, man, especially when you're struggling, it's like, how could you do that? But I think the world would certainly be a better place if we all tried.
Right, right. Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about just seeing each other as fractals of God. My kind of rose-colored vision for the future um is for an age of the spirit, an age of seeing everyone, but also not everyone, but also everything. Getting back into good relationship with the environment, with the earth, and treating that well, because we need that to survive, and that's also part of our health. Nature, it's very
Oh,
it's
for
very
sure.
healing, and so when we can get in right relationship with each other and with the earth, and see each other as spiritual beings, worthy of love and understanding, then that hopefully that can break down all these barriers and these tribes and bring us together. And obviously that's a lot easier said than done, but I, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know what possibly could get us there other than some kind of like transcendent unifying technology or something.
Hmm.
But yeah, that would be That would be a beautiful thing. Like it's really sad because I think we've reached this tipping point in the population where there's just too many people, too much struggling, too many different ideas, that you're always going to have these like groups that are going to form that are going to be antagonistic toward one another. But there would need to be some kind of mass leveling that occurred.
Hmm.
And I just don't know how we get there apart from some kind of like hive mind thing. But then you sacrifice individuality at that point too, because there's no way you could have like some sort of interconnected hive mind and leave really a true individual anymore. So
Right.
that's like the weird double-edged
Hmm.
sword.
Have you seen or read the Expanse series,
No,
sci-fi?
I've heard about it though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get too much spoilers, but there's a hive mind in there.
Mm.
Also Ender's Game. Yeah. But uh, I think that's why the woo woo is so appealing. If everything about it is true, because I think a lot of these things lead to oneness and to breaking the paradigm, and something that if we all realize it will help us. Like say for example, if we could all read each other's minds,
Hmm.
obviously that would be pretty chaotic and hard at first, but um then we couldn't lie to each other. um and if we can, if energy healing is a thing, then um not that regular medicine isn't important and good, but there's a lot more options, and to healing more
Hmm.
naturally in many instances, and that we can have this connection to our body and help each other. And then like ETs, it's like, oh, if we see a model of civilization that has found a way to be more unified together, then that's inspiring for us. And um, I think there might be a way of unity without uniformity, and so there can
Hmm.
still be this oneness without a hive mind. Um,
I hope
but
so.
it's a lot. It's hard when we're not there to imagine what that would be like. But I think that there is fruit in imagining possibilities, and that's what art is. It's imagining the possibilities to try to see how we can get there, or
Yeah.
see if imagining these possibilities, oh, this is a bad option that we don't want to go down.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah. I think people have a capacity for a ton of things, but it's just the way we operate, the way we prioritize things, the way we view the world has to definitely undergo extreme renovation, I think, for
Hmm.
us to get there. Like just even from the like way that countries and power systems are structured and the way we look at the world in terms of like here's my stuff, here's your stuff, and like and it sounds like I'm trying to like advocate for some sort of like Marxist utopia or something, and that's
Hmm.
not really what I'm saying. Like because I don't advocate for that, but I also it's also like something foundationally would have to change about our priorities and the way we view ourselves as beings and
Hmm.
what we're doing here.
Hmm.
It's like yeah, I of course I don't have the answers on this. It's like it's the largest, most unsolvable problem
Hmm.
imaginable.
Right. We're stumbling in the dark here, but
Totally.
I think that there's glimpses of hope in it, and I see that, and so I'm interested. I'm hopeful for the future, and see where we go from here.
Me too. Yeah, I'm always hopeful. I'm always hopeful that things are going to work out for the best and that there is some sort of curvature, some sort of narrative, some sort of point, some sort of like directionality at least, even if it's not some perfectly laid out teleological plan. It's like there's a
Hmm.
process
Hmm.
unfolding. It does I do suspect that whether that's just my own bias or not, I don't know, of course, but that is what I suspect.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in a lot of places. It might be a little hard to sum up, but is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share?
I think that's a good place, man, is like what I was saying before about trusting yourself, trusting the world, just trusting, being more open. And that's a level like that's like the level of macro trust where we just
Hmm.
ended. Like it's like at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know the ontological truth of like what's going on.
Hmm.
But I know that if you are able to feel like you're part of a mystery that's imbued with purpose and meaning and a direction, and that you have an important role to play in it, that's that makes life better. Like that makes life
Right.
more meaningful and more um like a place that I want to exist. So that's my that's what I encourage.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're living a life that does not allow for that or does not open you to vistas of wonder and mystery more readily, I would I would encourage you to try to position yourself accordingly.
Hmm. Right. I totally agree. There's a verse in the Bible talking about after, um, like once the kingdom of heaven is established, that after all these things pass away, what will remain is faith, hope, and love. And I
Hmm.
still feel that
Oh yeah, I love
that's an
that.
amazing, yeah, verse. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. It was really great. You always inspire my imagination, my curiosity, and openness, and so I really appreciate you in the way you are and what you do for everyone else.
Appreciate you too, man. And I'm stoked that you're doing a show. And yeah, man, all the best to you and keep wonder dipping.
Yeah. Thanks. You too. All right.